I drove down the lonely country road in the dead of night, my headlights cutting through a thick veil of fog. The forest pressed in on either side, towering pines and gnarled oaks looming over the narrow asphalt like silent sentinels. There were no other cars, not even distant taillights, just me and the darkness ahead. The air was still and heavy, and every now and then I had to remind myself to breathe. I felt a growing weight in my chest the closer I got to my destination, as if some invisible force were pressing against me, urging me to turn back. At one point, I swore I glimpsed a pale figure standing on the shoulder of the road up ahead, but as my car drew near, it dissolved into the swirling mist. Perhaps it was only a wisp of fog catching the moonlight, I told myself, yet my hands tightened on the wheel on their own. My nerves were already raw, and I hadn't even arrived at the house yet. The driveway to the property appeared suddenly out of the trees, marked by a pair of crumbling stone pillars strangled by ivy. I turned in and followed the overgrown path until my headlights finally washed over the silhouette of Ashwood Manor. It was even more imposing than I remembered from my childhood, a 3-story Victorian monstrosity of peeling paint and shuttered windows, its dark slate roof and turret jutting into the starless sky. The porch sagged but held, and as I parked and cut the engine, the sudden silence was deafening. I sat for a moment in the car, staring at the house's blank windows, which seemed like empty eyes watching me back. In that stillness, I questioned for the 100th time why I had agreed to come out here alone. My great-uncle Martin had died the previous year, leaving Ashwood Manor to me in his will. The place had stood abandoned since his passing, no buyers and no other relatives willing to set foot here. I told myself I was here on practical business, to catalog the estate's contents and perhaps prepare it for sale. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. This house had been the center of hushed family stories and childhood nightmares for years. Part of me needed to confront whatever lurked in its long-neglected halls, if only to put those old ghosts to rest. I forced myself out of the car and walked up the porch steps with slow, deliberate steps. The wood complained under my weight, each groan echoing in the quiet night. I found the heavy iron key my uncle's lawyer had sent me, and with a deep breath, I pressed it into the lock of the front door. The key turned with a loud click, and the door swung open with a long, drawn-out creak, as if exhaling after years of disuse. A gust of stale, cold air greeted me, carrying the scent of dust and damp wood. I stepped inside and illuminated the foyer with my flashlight. Dust motes swirled in the beam as I swept it slowly across the space. The entry hall was frozen in time. An ornate chandelier hung above, its crystals dull with cobwebs. A long staircase led upward into darkness, and along the walls, old paintings and photographs stared out from gilded frames. I recognized a few ancestral faces from family albums. Their eyes seemed to watch me as I passed, as if the ghosts of the past were already aware of my presence. The floorboards felt icy even through my boots, and I shivered, pulling my coat tighter around myself. After taking a few more hesitant steps inside, I set my duffel bag down on an antique side table and decided to make camp in the parlor just off the foyer. The less wandering around I did tonight, the better. With some groping in the dark, I found a box of long-forgotten candles and a book of matches in a drawer. Soon I had a single candle lit on a dusty coffee table, its tiny flame pushing back just a little of the darkness. It wasn't much, but the warm glow was a comfort against the chill. I unfurled a sleeping bag on the ancient sofa, its springs sagging under me as I sat down to catch my breath. My nerves were on edge from the journey and the sheer oppressiveness of the manor's silence. I reminded myself that I had spent countless nights alone in less comfortable places during college camping trips. This was just another old house. Nothing here could actually hurt me. A sudden thump from somewhere above made me jump. It sounded like something had moved on the second floor, directly above the parlor. I killed the noise of my own breathing and listened intently, candle in hand. Thud. Drag. There it was again, a muffled noise like a chair being gently pushed across a floor. My mind raced through logical explanations, perhaps warped beams contracting in the cold, or a raccoon that had gotten in. The house was old. It had plenty of reason to groan. Still, knowing that didn't stop my heart from pounding. I stood up slowly, debating whether to go upstairs and check, but the darkness at the top of the staircase was absolute. In the end, I just stood in the foyer and peered up from the bottom step, lifting my flashlight. "Hello?" I called quietly, instantly regretting breaking the silence. My voice sounded small and uncertain, swallowed by the vast dark. Nothing answered, of course. As I turned back to the parlor, a soft creak echoed from down the main hall, as if a door had gently opened or closed on its own. I froze, shining my flashlight toward the sound, but saw only a long corridor vanishing into blackness. I realized I was holding my breath again and forced myself to exhale. It's just the wind, I thought, knowing full well no breeze could move a door that slowly or deliberately. Deciding I would rather face whatever was in store with some rest, I retreated to the sofa. I left the candle burning on the table and kept my flashlight within reach beside me. Wrapped in my sleeping bag, I lay there staring up at the dim ceiling, trying to convince myself that the noises were all in my head. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with adrenaline. My eyes grew heavy, and I was just starting to drift off when the candlelight suddenly guttered and died. I sat bolt upright in darkness, my pulse thundering in my ears. The candle's flame had been snuffed out, no draft, no warning. I fumbled for the flashlight with trembling hands and clicked it on, flooding the room with harsh white light. Nothing. No intruder, no animal. The door to the hall stood half open, just as I had left it. Only silence and emptiness greeted me. I was wide awake now, every muscle tensed. A part of me wanted to grab my keys and spend the rest of the night in the car, or drive back to town and return in daylight. But then what? I'd come this far, and somehow the idea of stepping back outside into the sea of fog and forest, where I'd seen that strange silhouette on the road, felt just as frightening. I decided to stick it out until morning. I would not let an old, empty house break my resolve. Still clutching the flashlight, I lay back down and kept it on until my eyes finally shut on their own. At some point, I must have drifted into a shallow, fitful sleep. I dreamed I was a child again, creeping through these halls with a candle in my hand. In the dream, the house was not abandoned. Faint music was playing somewhere distant, and I could hear laughter echoing from upstairs. Yet I was alone, walking toward that ladder. As I climbed an endless stairwell, the laughter turned to sobbing. I followed the sound to a door at the end of a long hallway. My name came from behind it, spoken in a hushed, pleading voice. "Please, come here." In the dream, I pushed the door open, only to jerk awake with a gasp, my heart hammering. Pale early light was filtering in through the grime-coated windows of the parlor. I was drenched in sweat despite the cold, and I could still hear the echo of that pleading voice from my dream. It had sounded so real, as if someone had been right next to me, whispering into my ear. Shakily, I got up and rubbed my face. Morning had finally come. Somehow, I had survived the first night in Ashwood Manor. The daylight made Ashwood Manor feel a little less threatening, though no less sad and aged. I spent the morning exploring the house room by room, determined to not let the previous night's scares chase me away. The grand staircase led to a labyrinth of corridors and rooms above. I found guest bedrooms with mildewed four-poster beds, a study filled with moldering books and yellowed papers, and a nursery still stocked with tiny furniture draped in sheets. Dust lay thick everywhere, undisturbed, except for a single set of footprints. My own, and curiously, a faint dragging trail through the dust in the upstairs hallway. It looked like something heavy had been pulled along the floorboards recently, leaving a subtle path that led toward a door at the very end of the hall. I approached that door with a strange mix of apprehension and curiosity. It was a plain wooden door, no different from the others in the corridor, yet it felt distinctly out of place, as if it belonged to another time. The brass knob was ice cold under my palm. I turned it, but it refused to budge. The door was locked tight. A sense of disappointment mingled with relief washed over me. This had to be the source of the noises I'd heard. Perhaps a draft had caused the door to rattle, or the wood had expanded. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was sealed on the other side. I gave the door a final, fruitless push, then stepped back. In my uncle's study, amid ledgers and letters from decades past, I found a small leather-bound journal that I recognized as his handwriting. Most entries were mundane, notes about finances, weather, the groundskeeper's schedule. But as I flipped toward the final pages, the tone changed dramatically. The handwriting grew erratic. Phrases jumped out at me. Nights impossible to sleep, whispering from the walls. Saw Margaret again at the foot of my bed. I vaguely remembered family gossip that Margaret had never recovered from the loss of their infant daughter decades ago. This nursery had belonged to that child. Margaret had been my great-uncle's wife, dead for nearly 10 years. Another line read, "There is something in the house with me, in the walls or beyond them. I've sealed the old nursery. It's the only way to contain her, but I fear it won't hold." My hands were shaking by the time I reached the final entry, which was just a scrawl. "I am so tired. I can't keep the door shut much longer." The day passed in a haze of unease. By late afternoon, gray clouds had swallowed the sun, and a steady rain began drumming against the roof. It was as if the outside world was closing itself off, leaving me truly alone with whatever dwelled here. Despite every instinct telling me to leave before nightfall, I found myself lingering. Perhaps it was morbid curiosity, or the sense that I owed it to Uncle Martin, and even to Aunt Margaret, to understand what had driven them to such despair. As dusk fell, I lit every candle I could find and placed them in the foyer and hallway, determined not to be caught in complete darkness again. For a long while, nothing happened. The house was deathly still, and I began to foolishly hope that maybe last night had been the worst of it. Then, just past midnight, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A lullaby. Muffled, faint, like a music box playing a sweet, sad melody. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Somewhere upstairs? The nursery. It had to be. Heart pounding, I crept up the staircase, the candle sputtering as I passed. The melody continued, growing clearer. Halfway down the upper hallway, it stopped abruptly, leaving only the patter of rain on the roof. I stood before the locked nursery door, every nerve screaming for me to turn back, but some unseen force, or my own burning need for answers, compelled me to raise the heavy key ring I'd taken from the study. There was one small key I hadn't tried yet, tarnished with age. My hands shook as I fitted into the old lock. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't turn, but then with a grating scrape, the key rotated and the lock gave way. The door swung inward, revealing the nursery beyond. I stepped inside, sweeping the flashlight around. The air was icy, each breath escaping my lips in white puffs. Tiny motes of dust drifted in the beam. The nursery looked much as one would expect after years of neglect. An old rocking chair, a crib, shelves filled with shadowy shapes of toys. But then I noticed the rocking chair was moving, a gentle back and forth creak as if someone had just been sitting in it and stood up. Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me with a tremendous force, the bang reverberating through the house. I whirled around and grabbed the knob, but it wouldn't turn. I was trapped. My flashlight flickered, and I pounded on it in panic to keep it alive. In the dim glow, I became aware of a figure standing by the crib. A woman stood there in the gloom, her back turned to me. Even in the faint light, I could see her long, dark hair cascading over the shoulders of a pale, antiquated dress. She was humming the same lullaby I'd heard earlier. My throat clenched. "Aunt Margaret?" I whispered before I could stop myself. The humming stopped. The figure went rigid. Slowly, she turned to face me. In the brief flash of lightning from outside, I saw her clearly. Aunt Margaret, just as she appeared in old photographs. But her eyes were all wrong. They were milky and vacant, and yet somehow I felt her gaze boring into me. Her lips moved, forming a single word, "Martin?" The voice was thin, crackling with an ethereal echo. She drifted a step closer. I realized she was not touching the floor at all. Her feet hovered inches above the rotten carpet. I pressed back against the door, my mind screaming that this was impossible, even as I saw it with my own eyes. "No, I'm not him," I managed to stammer. Something in her face changed at that. The gentle features twisted into a mask of anguish and fury. Her mouth gaped open, and a horrifying wail poured out, a sound of heartbreak and rage so powerful I dropped to my knees, clapping my hands over my ears. The temperature plummeted further. I could feel frost crackling across the window panes and creeping along the walls. She lunged. Out of instinct or sheer terror, I flung the flashlight at her. It passed right through her form and shattered against the wall, plunging the room into near darkness. In the strobing flash of another lightning strike, I saw her reaching for me with withered, translucent hands. Desperate, I scrambled away, throwing myself against the window. The glass, old and brittle, exploded outward under my weight, and I half fell, half climbed through the narrow frame. Rain and wind lashed at me as I landed hard on the porch roof below the window, pain jolting up my arm. Ignoring the pain, I crawled to the edge of the porch awning and dropped down to the front yard, stumbling onto the wet, overgrown grass. Behind me, from the gaping nursery window above, I heard that awful wail again. I didn't dare look back. Clutching my bruised arm, I sprinted for my car. The rain soaked me to the bone within seconds. I practically leapt into the driver's seat, my shaking hands barely managing to fit the key into the ignition. For one agonizing second, the engine sputtered and failed. "Please, please, please," I begged, turning the key again. This time the car roared to life. Without a second thought, I slammed it into reverse, then tore down the long driveway, gravel kicking up behind me. Only once I hit the main road did I dare to breathe. My chest ached and my head was swimming, but I was away. I had escaped Ashwood Manor. A hysterical laugh of relief bubbled up in my throat. I risked a glance at the rearview mirror to take one last look at the house receding behind me in the rainy darkness. Lightning flashed, illuminating the interior of the car for the briefest moment. In that split second, I saw I was not alone. Reflected in the mirror, just behind my seat, was the pale, waterlogged face of Aunt Margaret. Her eyes met mine through the glass. I opened my mouth to scream, but in the next heartbeat, the night swallowed everything once more. And that was the story of Ashwood Manor. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. Thanks for listening or watching, and if it gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying stories every week. Got a favorite moment or your own haunted experience? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. Until next time, keep the lights on. And whatever you do, don't look behind you.